Mr. President, there has been a long-standing question of whether or not there would be drilling for oil in the eastern Gulf of Mexico off of the state of Florida. This has been settled in law 10 years ago. Then my colleague, Senator Martinez, Mel Martinez, and I passed a portion of a legislation called GOMESA. That portion of the legislation put the drilling off of Florida in the eastern Gulf, everything east of a north-south line called the Military Mission Line, which is a line running south of approximately Fort Walton Beach. Everything east of that is off limits in law to any kind of oil drilling activity, along with the remainder of the coast of Florida, 125 miles from the coast, going all the way over to Pensacola and to the Perdido River, which is the Alabama-Florida line. The reason for this, it are many reasons, but not the least of which it's called the Military Mission Line. That area of the Gulf off of Florida is the largest testing and training area for the United States military in the world. It, compared to other testing ranges, such as the Nevada test site, it dwarfs that site because you can see from north to south, you have ranges as far as 300 miles. From east to west, for example, off of Naples, Florida, all the way west to the Military Mission Line is approximately 250 miles. And that has been needed by our U.S. military because of the testing and training. Now, it has been doubted over the years as the relentless pursuit of oil drilling by the oil industry has tried to erode into that, and that's why, in a bipartisan way, Senator Martinez and I put in law for that period of years up through 2022, from when we passed this back in 2006, off limits. The question is, what's coming afterwards? Well, of course, if it's up to the Department of Defense, there will be no oil drilling activity. And that's what I wanted to bring to the attention of the Senate today. Two previous secretaries of defense in Republicans' administrations, including Secretary Rumsfeld, have written letters to state the policy that any oil-related activity in that testing and training range would be incompatible with the mission of the testing and training of the U.S. military. The reason I'm bringing this to the attention of the Senate today, it has just come into my possession, a letter signed by the acting Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, a gentleman, Mr. A.M. Kurta, who is writing, and I quote, "I have been asked to respond to your letter." This is to Congressman Matt Gaetz on behalf of the Secretary of Defense. And this is regarding the maintaining of the moratorium on oil and gas activities in the Gulf of Mexico beyond the year 2022. And the letter states, and I quote, "The Department of Defense cannot overstate the vital importance of maintaining this moratorium." Now, why is that? The letter goes on to explain not only the necessity of which so many of our bases in the area, Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, all the testing and training of the F-22, the training of our pilots there, Eglin Air Force Base, the testing and training of the pilots for the F-35. And remember, the F-35 is being sold to many foreign nations, the testing and training of those pilots as well. But now, with new technologies, and I quote from the letter, emerging technologies such as hypersonics, autonomous systems, and advanced subsurface systems will be requiring enlarged testing and training footprints and increased DoD reliance on the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act's moratorium beyond 2022. The moratorium is essential for developing and sustaining our nation's future combat capabilities. End of quote. So I think it's pretty clear. There's one other issue, and this all follows, Mr. President, the fact that this senator filed a bill last January to extend this moratorium. Just recently, I point out that a bipartisan delegation of Florida, a good number of, a majority of the members of the Florida delegation, bipartisan, signed a letter to the Department of Interior and the Department of the Defense requesting the extension of this moratorium in law past the year 2022. The response from the Department of Defense has come today. So there's one further issue, and that is if it's off limits to oil drilling in law, is there any question about it ought to be off limits to seismic testing? That, to the author of the original legislation 10 years ago, should be clear. But therefore, we ought to clarify it. And the request of the Department of Defense is that a question arose whether Congress intended the moratorium to prohibit even geological and geophysical survey activities in the Eastern Gulf. We would welcome clarification from Congress concerning this matter. End of quote. And so it will be this senator's intent, joining in a bipartisan way with colleagues from Florida to get that clarification in extending the moratorium. Mr. President, I would ask consent that the letter be inserted in the record as a part of the congressional record.
Without objection.
And I would just say in conclusion, Mr. President, we can't have oil drilling not only for our national security and our testing and training of our most sophisticated weapon systems in the Gulf off of Florida, but also we can't stand it if we had another oil spill that would do to us what the last one did, a spill way far west off of Louisiana, but it drifted to the east and it blackened the sugary white sands of Pensacola Beach, Destin Beach, and tar balls as far east as Panama City Beach. And because of that, we lost an entire season of our guests, our tourists, coming to the Gulf Coast of Florida, not just in the Florida Panhandle, but all the way south down the Gulf to Naples and to Marco Island. And therefore, a $60 billion a year tourism industry to Florida's economy, we can't suffer that kind of shock again. So whether it be the degradation of the environment, the messing up of the training and testing of our U.S. military in their largest testing and training range, or the economic devastating loss to Florida of its tourism industry. For all of those reasons, we need to pass this legislation. It will be coming forth in a bipartisan fashion. Mr. President, I yield the floor.